Good morning, guys. Happy Friday. Hopefully, you guys had a good week. 2 weeks down into our online learning. Hopefully, it's coming smoother. I think it is becoming a little bit more smooth for you guys because I'm getting less messages from you guys throughout the day. So that's positive. But yeah, so today I did something. I left the hidden camera yesterday in my jungle, and I just wanted to share with some of the footage that I found from the jungle. Here we go. So in my jungle, we have Legos. We have a snail, a bee that wants to come in. We have some ants carrying strawberries, Honey Nut Cheerios, leaves. We have some mushrooms that look like ladybugs, and we have another ladybug. We have a huge apple with a nice little butterfly on top, and a baby snake. Not a worm, but a snake. And I think that's everything that I caught in my little jungle. So yeah, pretty interesting. So if any of you guys want some extra credit, you guys are more than welcome to come over to my house and cut down the grass or do whatever you want. I know Alonso and Santi already volunteered, but if anybody else wants to come down and mow the lawn, you're more than welcome to, and I'll give you extra credit. But anywho, let's go on and get into the lessons for today. Alrighty, so yesterday we talked about Marco Polo and how the Silk Road reopened, and how Marco Polo was like this ambassador from Italy to China, and how he sparked all this interest and grew the trade back in China, and how when he went back to his hometown in Italy, that he told everybody about all the findings, all the beauties that he saw in China, and it made people curious. And because of this curiosity, trade increased back and forth on the Silk Road, thanks to the Mongols for protecting the land and for making it beautiful for people to go back and forth again. And now, because trade is opening up and so many Europeans or Italians are curious with trade and with China, trade is going to start to become a big thing in Italy. And a lot of these cities that we know became really popular through this time because of these trading cities. We are going to focus on 4 main cities. Today we're just going to get a little touch base on them, and then we'll jump into a deeper dive next week. Okay? So here we go. So for number 1, what ancient trade route did the Polos travel on? You guys all got this correct. They all traveled on the Silk Road. Remember, during at first the Silk Road, it became a little dangerous with all the battles going on, but then when the Mongols took over, it became a lot safer. Number 2, how did the Polos affect trade with Asia? So Polos, with how they affected trade, was they were great ambassadors. They were good people that talked, they wrote things down, they were in love with the culture, and they shared their love with everybody else. And then they got all their friends and family and their whole country of Italy to get really excited about trade with Asia, and they became really curious and they wanted to go over there. And this is where we're going to pick up today. So now that everyone's curious, they're going to start to travel along this Silk Road, and trade is just going to start to boom for both countries. Alrighty, so today we are going to talk about the trade cities and how they started to develop and grow wealthy in Italy, and how they started to compete against each other. So for today, the objective is going to be, we're going to be able to explain how the wealthy trade cities in Italy developed and how they started to compete against one another. So let's go ahead and get into it. So by the 1300s, there's 4 major cities that became trading centers in Italy. And these trading centers go by, first off, on the map, if you look to the right, number 1, the city of Milan. So it's like where Juventus plays, Inter Milan, AC Milan, that's their city. Number 2, we have the city of Genoa, and you may have known them for their salami nowadays. They have the Genoa salami. Number 3, Venice, Italy. This is the city that has all those canals. We've seen it on CNN 10. We have Venice Beach. It's named after this city. And if you didn't know, if you ever go down to Venice Beach, we actually do have our own little canals, just like they have in Venice, Italy. And then number 4, we have Florence, Italy. And Florence, Italy, I think I showed you guys pictures of Florence before. It's the city with these huge domes, and we'll see it a little bit later. So when you went to these cities, you can see these cities. These cities were hustling and bustling. They were packed with people. And if you were in these cities, shoppers, you can buy goods from their cities, from the hometowns, but you often could buy beautiful goods from Asia. So if you wanted to buy things from China, you would go to these cities, and this is where you can find it. In these cities, just like everything, when you're trading, not only are you trading goods, but you're also trading your culture. So in these cities, you can find cultures, and these cultures were blending with each other. You can hear a bunch of different languages. People were socializing. Everyone was just having a good old time in this area, which is going to spark this thing called the Renaissance that we started to talk about. Because of all these cultures blending, because of all these arts, because of the money flowing, it's going to spark these new ideas, and we're going to get into that just a little bit later. So these Italian cities, they played two very important roles in trade. The first important role that they played was as ports, trading ports, where you can go and trade things. So the first role was their trading ports on the Mediterranean Sea. And remember, the Mediterranean Sea connects Asia, Africa, and Europe. So Venice and Genoa were Italy's main port cities. Venice was known, and they grew rich from their sea trade. Florence, they were known for their banking and trading center, and their city's wealthy leaders used their money to build beautiful cities with massive buildings and art. So if you look to the map, or if you look to the right on the pictures, Venice is number 3 and Florence is number 4. Okay. Merchant ships in these cities brought spices and other luxury goods from Asia into the city's harbors, and from there, these merchants would ship these goods all across Europe. The other role was the manufacturing centers, and these cities specialized in making the crafts and making products to trade. So Venice, they were known for producing glass and glass works. Workers in Milan made weapons and silk. People in Florence, they were the centers for weaving wool into cloth. And all this economic activity put more and more money in the merchants' pockets. So these merchants became really wealthy from living in these cities and making these goods. Some Italian families actually became incredibly wealthy, and because of this, their wealth gained them power. So this wealth not only would give them power, but they would also start to put an influence on the European culture, and they started to pretty much whatever they wanted, they began to influence everywhere else, or influence the culture in the city. So during this time in Italy in the 1300s, Italy wasn't really one country. Instead, it was actually made up into individual states. So all those cities that we talked about, they're pretty much independent of each other, even though now they're all cities in Italy. So some of these states, they had really different forms of government. For example, in Venice, there was a republic where you got to really choose the people that you wanted to go, and the Pope ruled most of these states, and the Pope had a lot of influence on their government. In most big cities, or big Italian cities, a single rich merchant family controlled the government. So remember how we were talking about how the rich people started to influence people, or influence the culture? Well, if you were the richest person, you were pretty much in control of that government. And this type of government was called a signoria. Okay, so this is called a signoria, and this was the type of government. This is when the wealthiest families were in charge. So the head of the family was the signori, and they ruled the city. Under the signori, trade grew in Italy. So under these wealthy families, the trade was growing, and it was becoming faster, bigger, and better. So in fact, the signori, they actually started to compete against each other to see who could grow the city and who could make the city the biggest, the richest, and the most beautiful from trade. So they had this huge competition, and pretty much what happened was they had a competition saying, if you can make the city the most pretty, the most prestigious, then you win. So these wealthy families started to build on trade, and they started to go ahead and really beautify their cities. And this was a good thing, because now, with all this money going, Italy was going to become as beautiful as we know it to this day because of these wealthy families. Because they wanted to outdo the other cities and show who was more wealthy and who could have the biggest, most beautiful city, it led to this kind of competition. And whoever was going to have the biggest city would become the most powerful. And that's kind of like what influenced them to make these cities so beautiful. And and to continue growing their trade. So as a quick review, as the trade started to grow in Asia, trade also started to grow in Italy. We had these 4 major trading cities: Venice, Milan, Genoa, and Florence. And these all became meccas or trading cities. All of them were known for different things, with Venice and Florence being the port cities, and then we had them shipping everything out throughout Europe. Remember, these cities had 2 important roles. The first role was they were trading cities, and the second part was they were known for distribution centers or manufacturing centers. During this time, some of these merchants were getting really, really wealthy, and the more wealthy you were, the more power you had. Back then, the government was actually ran by the most wealthiest family. During this time, they also weren't part of Italy. They were all independent states, and they kind of had a little competition going on with each other to see who can build the most beautiful, the best, have the most art, and who can pretty much become the wealthiest city. And this was a little competition they had between the cities, and it only led to more of the growth of trade and making Italy as beautiful as we know it to this day. So for homework, I want you to answer these questions. What were the 4 great trading cities in Italy during the 1300s? 2. Oh, actually, for number 1, can you also tell me if you can remember what were they known for? Number 2, why did the location of Genoa and Venice on the seacoast give them an advantage over most inland cities? Why were Venice and Genoa more important than Florence and Milan? Number 3, how were the governments ran in the big Italian cities? Who was in charge of the governments and how did they run? Alright, so today we talked about how the trade in Italy started to grow and how wealthy families took over and how the city started to become beautiful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the video or message me through in Class Dojo, Class Dojo or Classroom, whatever you like. If not, I'll see you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend.